Hi guys, today we will see how you can configure client ID enforcement into your Mule application. Before configuring client ID enforcement, we need to create a YAML. For the time being, I have already created a YAML as you can see. So in this YAML, I have this trait client ID required and I have placed two headers, client ID and client secret. Here we have types, we can externalize these types as well, but for the time being, I have placed it in the YAML itself. And we have mentioned is client ID required so that these endpoint must have client ID when we request. We can also see the request here, right? So these client ID and client secret are required headers. I have published this API to Exchange and we can see that now. Customer order API. Again, to apply client ID enforcement policy, we need to create API instance in API manager. So we are going to do that right now. We are in the sandbox environment and let's create a API instance. So we are going to use Mule gateway, connect to an existing application, Mule flow, select our API. Everything looks good. Client providers endpoint, do a next and next. So this is all we need to configure. You just have to save this. And now let us add the policy. We have to select client ID enforcement and next. Here we have two options. First one is the basic authentication header and the second is custom expression. So currently we are going to use custom expression and leave these values as it is. Just apply the policy. Okay, the policy is applied and now we need to get the client ID and client secret for this application. For that we need to go to Exchange and request access from here. So we will use this API instance that we have just created and we'll create application. Let's say order, or let's say customer order API and request access. This will be auto approved and you have the client ID and client secret. So you can close this for now and you can access this client ID and client secret from my application as well. Here as you can see the client ID and client secret you just created for customer order API. Now I have created one project in my Anypoint Studio and scaffolded the customer order API from Exchange. Now if I deploy this application, it will ask for client ID and client secret as I've mentioned that in header. But for now I can pass those values empty as well. Before I'll show you if I don't pass the values what will happen. It says bad request because we haven't mentioned the required header client ID and client secret. If I pass these values without any actual value in it, it will be successful because it just required the client ID and client secret. Currently, the policy is not applied to this application. To apply that policy to this application, we need to configure auto discovery. And for this, we need API ID, which we'll get from API manager. Here, open this, and this is your API ID. The flow name will be the main flow. Now we have applied the auto discovery. After that, you also need to add the client ID and client secret of either the environment or business group. I have already added these in my Anypoint Studio, and let's save this application and show you how you where you have to add this. So these are under Anypoint Studio you have API manager. Here you have to add these client ID and client secret. You just need to validate it and see if it is working fine. Apply and close. And now as you can see, policy client ID enforcement is applied. And now if you do that, you have the 401 unauthorized and invalid client because you haven't passed the client ID and client secret. Now to get the client ID and client secret, we need to go back again to Exchange and My Applications. Here you can see those client ID and client secret. You can copy the client ID, paste it here. Same you have to do for client secret and send request. Now the request is successful because we have passed the correct client ID and client secret. So this is how you configure your application with client ID enforcement policy.